1836, Washington, D.C. The Second Bank of the United States is destroyed. After a long political battle, President Andrew Jackson's victory over federal financial control signaled a new era for America. The dissolution of national banking in 1836 sent shockwaves through U.S. markets. Jackson's subsequent Treasury circular obliterated the stability of banks, leading to financial panic across the nation. Western states began to realize that East Coast banking could no longer be trusted. In an era of rapid land settlement and short credit, something new was needed for America.
Many Americans in the 1800s feared the rapid expansion of the federal government. For some, the thought of the federal elite circumscribing the citizens' right conjured up images of the abuse they faced by Great Britain nearly a decade before. This resulted in a schism between proponents of federal power and those opposed. In the 1830s, the opposition assumed power with the election of Andrew Jackson. During his presidency, Andrew Jackson found himself to be a supporter of hard money and condemned banks that issued paper currency, which furthered his opposition towards the U.S. national banking system. The bank charter would expire in 1836, and the question of a recharter became one of the chief issues in the 1832 election between Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson. Jackson's repudiation of the national banking system and his support of states' rights led him to his overwhelming victory in 1832. He was now primed to kill the national banking system once and for all.
The bank itself, conscious of its purity and proud of its character, would have withdrawn its application for the present and demanded the severest scrutiny into all its transactions. In their declining to do so, there seems to be an additional reason why the functionaries of the government should proceed with less haste and more caution in the renewal of their monopoly.
Jackson weakened the bank early on. He removed funds from the system and replaced the Secretary of the Treasury with his ally, Roger B. Taney. Taney took out more funds from the bank and placed them in pet banks. In 1836, he vetoed the bank recharter. The start of the free banking system after Jackson killed the national banking system ushered in a period when states chartered banks without federal interference. Several Western states passed free banking laws to spur financial growth. The Wildcat banking system functioned as follows, according to the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. To start a free bank, the owners would typically sell subscriptions, shares of stock in the bank, and use the proceeds to buy eligible government bonds to deposit with the state authority. If the bonds were approved, the state authorities would allow the bank to start issuing banknotes.
The trouble with, on the frontier, which is where the farmers wanted to go to, going all the way back, into the time when the frontier was, 10 miles east of the East Coast, and the frontier just keeps moving west. Frontier areas were chronically short of credit. That's what people needed. And when Jackson destroyed the central banking system, the only game in town for a lot of these people were kind of these wildcat banks, or these free banks.
The rise of wildcat banking provided the much-needed credit for farmers to prosper in the new territories. The population of the Midwest boomed. Farms, businesses, and entire communities were built by the availability of credit. New fertile lands were open to prospective settlers. Free credit was no longer a magic trick of New York stock jobbers, but a tool of farmers and businessmen to build a better life out west. Wildcat money was the lifeblood of this new frontier society. However, the independent nature of free banking had its setbacks.
No man is safe sleeping overnight with $1 of Illinois currency in his pockets. There is a great danger of a mob in our city. The day laborers will never be content to work for Wildcat, which is not worth 33 1/3 cents on the dollar.
Between 1837 and 1862, nearly half of all free banks closed in New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Indiana. The most infamous bank closures were in Michigan, where in a matter of 2 years, all but 4 of Michigan's free banks closed. Economists estimate that around $4 million evaporated, which was equal to nearly 45% of Michigan's annual income in 1840. The free banks that managed to survive in the hostile frontier economy continued to grow due to their isolation from more powerful East Coast banks. After the burst of railroad bubbles in the American West and the evaporation of British gold reserves, the entire world economy was set for a recession. In 1857, the culmination of various international economic developments shocked U.S. banks. The Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company, one of the largest investment banks in the Midwest, was the first institution to collapse. The collapse of this western behemoth sent panic throughout eastern banks and railroad companies. The crisis snowballed into various railroad layoffs and bankruptcy. This had a serious impact on farmers who relied on railroads to transport grain to market. After 20 years of relatively peaceful activity, Americans were yet faced again with an economic crisis. The Panic of 1857 demonstrated the instability of small free banks controlling the finances of the nation.
With the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln, a civil war began between the North and South that would put an end to wildcat banking and its unregulated practices. The federal government's need for funding sparked a slew of changes that effectively ended wildcat banking in 1863. With a civil war imminent, the Union government needed to raise money to fund the war effort. However, the unregulated practices of wildcat banks proved to be detrimental to their efforts. As a result, Lincoln decided to pass legislation that would establish a national currency and allow for the government to take loans out for war supplies. Furthermore, to help remedy this sudden need for money, the federal government and advocates for more government control instituted a national currency to stabilize the American market. One of the first national American currencies was introduced by Thaddeus Stevens, an important advocate of the Legal Tender Act, which introduced greenbacks to the U.S. currency. This would be the first legislation that attempted to ease the war debt caused by the Civil War and that gave the federal government more power and control. Another hallmark of Lincoln's acts was the Homestead Act, which provided stability to landowners migrating to the West. This act created a government-promoted migration system that encouraged settlers to purchase 160 acres of land for a small price after living on it for 5 years. The National Banking Act of 1863 changed the American banking system. It chartered national banks, instituted a federal currency for all banks, and taxed state banknotes 2%, coercing them to join the federal system. With a nationalized banking system, America saw stability and regulation like never before, and the illicit dealings of wildcat banks were halted.
Because it kind of, it was a wartime measure, but it did centralize the financial system, and in terms of what I said in my earlier answer, it did give a certain stability to the system. So it really did. It combined with the Homestead Act, which was around the same time, it did mean that westward expansion, when it resumed after the Civil War, was in a more stable kind of way. So I think that the Currency Act and everything like that did really help stabilize the system.
As Professor Senkowitz notes, boom and bust cycles continue to characterize the American economy. Similar to the wildcat banking era, the subprime mortgage crisis of the mid-2000s indicated the far-reaching impact of overspeculation. Various experiments with unregulated banking ultimately ended in failure. However, what was unique about the free banking era was the American ideals of individualism and independence. Financial power wasn't just in the hands of privileged bankers, it was now in the hands of settlers and farmers. The idea of banks serving local communities embodies the frontier spirit from which it emerged. While precarious loans ultimately precipitated financial tragedy, wildcat banks gave countless individuals the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.